Margaret Pierce led a calm and measured life in a small town in Pennsylvania. Every morning she woke up early, prepared breakfast for herself and her husband, Michael, and then got ready for work at the local elementary school where she had been teaching children for over 30 years. That day seemed just like any other. The sun was shining outside, and the morning started peacefully and quietly. But a sudden chest pain disrupted the familiar rhythm of the day. The pain was sharp and unexpected. At first, Margaret thought it was just indigestion or stress. But within a few moments, she realized something was seriously wrong. Her breathing became shallow, and she could barely call out to Michael, who was in another room. Everything around her began to fade, and as she felt herself collapsing to the floor, Margaret lost consciousness. Margaret awoke, but something was different. She saw her body lying on the kitchen floor. Michael was next to her, his face twisted in fear, desperately trying to revive her. At that moment, the paramedics rushed in and began providing medical assistance. However, Margaret felt a strange detachment. She felt no pain or panic. Instead, she was filled with an incredible sense of calm. It seemed as though she no longer belonged to her body. She couldn't quite grasp whether she was dead or not, but there was no fear. The world around her slowly began to dissolve. Sensations, sounds, and even the shapes of objects disappeared, except for one thing: a bright, warm light that seemed incredibly close and inviting. This light radiated love and warmth like nothing she had ever experienced on Earth. Margaret took a step forward, drawn by the power of the light pulling her closer. A figure appeared before her, surrounded by a glow that didn't blind but filled her with a profound sense of peace. As she came closer, she realized it was Jesus. He wasn't as she might have imagined him. His face was full of love and compassion, and from him emanated an extraordinary joy. He reached out his hand to her, and she felt her soul melt into this warmth, as if everything she had ever known took on a new, deeper meaning. "You are here for a reason," Jesus said, his voice soft but deep, penetrating the very core of her being. She felt as if she had always known him, as if their meeting was natural, as though her soul had always longed for this moment. Jesus took Margaret's hand, and they began their journey. Around her were breathtaking sights, reminiscent of earthly landscapes, but far more vivid and alive. They walked along a path paved with gold, so pure it was transparent. Surrounding her were fields with trees and flowers, each emitting incredible shades Margaret had never seen on Earth. They approached a city that glowed from within. It was the heavenly city, and Margaret was in awe of its grandeur. The city's walls were adorned with precious stones, and the buildings shone as though they were emitting light themselves. The entire city seemed to sing, and every part of it lived in harmony with the rest of the world. She saw beings walking the streets, humans, angels, and others she couldn't quite recognize. They all smiled and laughed, their faces filled with joy. Margaret was struck by how happy they all were and how their faces radiated love and peace. Jesus led her to a place where thousands of beings seemed to be engaged in worship. But this was not ordinary worship. They weren't just singing or praying. Each of them was doing something unique. Some were dancing, some creating stunning artworks, others playing instruments Margaret had never seen before. Everything they did seemed part of a universal harmony, as if the entire universe was united in one grand act of glorifying God. "This is true worship," Jesus said. "Here in heaven, every action, every creation is a way of praising God." People often think that worship is just singing or praying, but here, worship is life itself. Everyone here finds their unique form of praise through creativity, learning, and serving others. Margaret realized that worship wasn't just a ritual, it was a state of the soul, permeating one's entire being. And here in heaven, it was pure, free of any barriers or distractions. Their journey brought them to the very center of heaven, to the throne of God. As Margaret approached, her heart began to race. The throne was surrounded by light, emanating from God Himself. This was a light that couldn't be described in words, so powerful and bright that she could barely look at it. But what struck her most was the love radiating from the throne. This love was so pure and all-encompassing that she felt her soul fill with boundless joy. Every moment near this light filled her with a sense of complete belonging and acceptance. "This love is meant for all," Jesus said, "and you must return and tell others about it." Margaret didn't want to leave this place. It was hard to comprehend that she would have to return to Earth, to her previous life, believing that no earthly experience could ever compare to what she had felt here. But Jesus, full of love and compassion, explained to her that her mission was not yet complete. "Your time has not yet come. You have a task. You must tell people what you have seen and experienced. They need to know that heaven is real and that the path to it lies through love and worship of me." Margaret felt the deep significance of his words and accepted her mission. With a sense of duty and purpose, she said goodbye to heaven, and her soul began its return to earth. When Margaret awoke, she was back in her body, surrounded by paramedics trying to stabilize her condition. The pain and heaviness returned, but along with them came an incredible sense of peace. She knew that her journey had been real, and now she had to live with a new awareness. Her entire worldview had changed. Now, every moment of her life became an act of worship to God. Margaret realized that her earthly life was just the beginning of the journey. Every action she took, from interacting with children to caring for her family, became part of her praise to God. She no longer saw her work as routine, but as an opportunity to express her love for God through helping others. Margaret knew that her task now was to share her experience with others. She wanted people to know that heaven is real, that it is available to anyone who seeks God and lives with love and faith. Her message was simple but profound. Worship is more than singing in church. It is a life filled with the awareness of God's presence. She spoke of how everyone could begin living in God's love right now, if they would seek Him every day. She wanted to inspire people to seek this love, not waiting for the end of their earthly days. Heaven is not only the future, but also the present for those who live in harmony with God. Each day of her life was now filled with meaning, and she knew that her mission was to bring this truth to as many people as possible. Grace Mitchell led a quiet and peaceful life in a small town in Oregon. Every morning, she rose early, prepared breakfast for herself and her husband, David, before heading to her job as a librarian at the local public library. She had been working there for over 25 years, and every day began just like the one before, calm, predictable, and full of routine. But one morning, everything changed. A sudden sharp pain gripped her chest. At first, Grace thought it might be just heartburn or a moment of stress, but the pain quickly intensified. Her breath became shallow, and she could barely call out to David, who was in the next room. The world around her began to blur, and she collapsed to the floor as darkness closed in. When Grace awoke, she found herself in an unfamiliar state. She was looking down at her own body, lying lifeless on the kitchen floor. David was kneeling next to her, frantically calling her name and trying to revive her. The panic on his face was evident as the paramedics rushed in, taking over. Strangely, Grace felt no fear, no pain, only a profound sense of detachment. It was as if her spirit was hovering above, watching from a distance. She no longer felt tied to her physical form. She couldn't quite grasp if she was alive or dead, but the absence of fear brought her a sense of calm she had never known. The world around her slowly began to dissolve. Sounds, shapes, even her sense of time. All that remained was a soft, warm light ahead, beckoning her closer. This light radiated an intense love and warmth that was entirely beyond anything she had ever experienced on Earth. Grace felt drawn to the light, which seemed to pull her in with a gentle force. As she moved closer, a figure began to emerge from the brightness. The figure was enveloped in a soft, radiant glow that didn't blind her, but instead filled her with the deepest sense of peace she had ever known. As she came closer, she realized she was in the presence of Jesus. He looked at her with eyes filled with boundless compassion and love. His face radiated joy, and his presence washed over her like a warm embrace. Jesus extended his hand toward her, and as Grace reached out, her soul seemed to melt into the light, as though everything she had ever known had gained a new, profound meaning. "You are here for a reason," Jesus said, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the core of her being. Grace felt as though she had always known him. Their meeting felt natural, as though her soul had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Jesus gently took Grace by the hand, and they began walking together. Around her stretched breathtaking landscapes, reminiscent of the earth, yet far more vivid and alive. They walked on a golden path so pure it was translucent. Fields of radiant flowers and majestic trees surrounded them, each emitting colors Grace had never seen before. As they continued, a city bathed in light appeared in the distance. This was the heavenly city, and its beauty overwhelmed her. Its walls sparkled with precious stones, and every building shone as though alive with an inner light. The city itself seemed to hum with joy, and everything, every detail, every corner, existed in perfect harmony. Grace saw beings moving through the streets, humans, angels, and others she couldn't quite identify. Their faces beamed with happiness, their eyes radiated love and peace. She was struck by how effortlessly they moved, each one filled with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Jesus led Grace to a place where thousands of beings were engaged in worship, but it wasn't like any worship Grace had known. There was no single form, no unified song or prayer. Instead, each being was expressing their worship in their own way. Some danced with joy, others painted with divine creativity, while some played instruments Grace had never seen before. Every act, every movement was part of a beautiful, harmonious tapestry of worship. "This is what true worship is," Jesus explained. "Here in heaven, every action, every creation is a form of praising God. People on earth often think worship is limited to singing or prayer, but here, worship is woven into every aspect of life. Each being expresses their love for God in their own unique way, through creativity, learning, and serving others." Grace realized that worship wasn't merely a ritual or act. It was a state of the soul, permeating everything. In heaven, it was pure, free of distractions or barriers. Their journey led them to the heart of heaven, to the throne of God. As they approached, Grace's heart began to race. The throne was surrounded by a brilliant light that radiated from God Himself. It was a light so powerful and so bright that words could not describe it. Yet, despite its intensity, Grace could still feel its warmth and love. But more than the light, what overwhelmed her was the love emanating from the throne. It was a love so pure, so infinite, that Grace's soul was filled with uncontainable joy. Every moment near that light made her feel completely accepted, completely loved. "This love is for everyone," Jesus said softly, "and you must return to tell them about it." Grace didn't want to leave. It seemed unimaginable to return to her earthly life after experiencing such boundless peace and joy. But Jesus, with eyes full of compassion, gently explained that her time had not yet come. "You still have work to do," he said. "You must tell the world what you have seen and experienced. People need to know that heaven is real, and that the path to it lies through love and worship of me." With a deep sense of purpose, Grace accepted her mission. Though it was difficult to say goodbye to heaven, she knew she had to return. Slowly, her soul began to pull away from the light and return to earth. When Grace awoke, she was back in her body, surrounded by the paramedics who were working to stabilize her. The pain and weight of the physical world returned, but along with them came a profound sense of peace. She knew that what she had experienced was real, and she now had a new mission on earth. Everything felt different. Every moment of Grace's life became an act of worship to God. She realized that her earthly life was only the beginning of a much greater journey. Each action she took, from helping those around her to caring for her family, became a form of praise. Her work as a librarian no longer felt routine, but became an opportunity to express love and service to others. Grace understood that her task now was to share her experience with the world. She wanted people to know that heaven is real, and that it is accessible to anyone who seeks God and lives with love and faith. Her message was simple yet profound. Worship is more than just singing hymns in church. It is living every moment with an awareness of God's presence. She spoke about how each person can begin living in God's love right now, without waiting for death. Heaven is not just a future hope, but a present reality for those who live in harmony with God. Each day of Grace's life was now filled with purpose, and she knew her mission was to spread this truth to as many people as possible.